Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today with a very special guest, friend of the firm, Pete Kazanjy, founder and CEO of Atrium. Pete, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here.
So Pete, we're going to get into sales. We're going to go to market. But by way of introduction, why don't you sort of trace your path that enabled you to become so knowledgeable about these topics?
Yeah, so I'm kind of an accidental sales leader. My background is actually in product management and product marketing. My first job in tech was at VMware. I worked in product management and product marketing for VMware Fusion, VMware Workstation, VMware Infrastructure, et cetera. And then eventually started my own recruiting software company called TalentBin, which is kind of like LinkedIn Recruiter for the whole internet. It's a recruiting automation and search company, eventually acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. But at TalentBin, I really went from being an initial kind of like business founder to first sales rep, then sales manager, then sales leader, really trying to like figure out how to do go to market and how to do sales. Because if we didn't, the company was going to die. Company was bought by Monster. And then after that, kind of my sales, my sales chops really kind of grew there. I ended up writing a book on sales for founders, or ended up writing a book on startup sales for founders called Founding Sales. It's essentially the book I wish I had when I was trying to figure things out at TalentBin. I run the nation's largest sales operations and sales leadership community. It's called Modern Sales. And my current software company, a sales performance analysis software company called Atrium. I also do a little bit of angel investing in, unsurprisingly, SaaS, MarTech, sales tech, et cetera, on the side.
Yeah. And so there's a bunch of topics I want to get into. First, let's spend a couple minutes talking about the talent space and then the sales tech space, putting on your investor perspective. So having built a talent bin and evaluated a ton of companies in the talent recruiting space, how have you sort of made sense of what's the opportunity in the space? Why is LinkedIn been sort of like the only major, decacorn in the space? Glassdoor was unicorn, but how have you sort of made sense of what's happened in the talent space up till now? And do you think that in the next 5 years things will change? Are you optimistic, or do you sort of say, hey, that space is hard to have really big outcomes?
Oh man, you're making me have to pretend that I have a recent thesis on this. So I think the talent space, to quote my friend John Bishke, who's the CEO of Entelo, I feel that the talent space is kind of where the sales and marketing tech space was about 10 to 15 years ago. And specifically, what I mean by that is that what you haven't yet seen is a specialization of tooling for specific use cases. So if you look at sales tech or MarTech, what you've got is a bunch of various point solutions, each of which is extremely valuable. As an example, look at the sales tech space like Outreach and SalesLoft for sales engagement, Chorus and Gong for call recording,
and voice ops.
Yeah, and voice ops. It's a portfolio company.
Yes.
Oh, pardon me.
But they're all great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like essentially what you get is these categories that grow over time. And really kind of the key of them is that by virtue of having a shared database of customer state, in this case, the monopolist there is Salesforce. But of course, Microsoft Dynamics and other folks as well. It enables those various use cases. You don't really have that yet in talent, and so this is why you kind of see ATSs, like applicant tracking systems, turn into these like big monolithic beasts that have kind of like everything associated with them. Now, the good news is that the newer school companies there, like the Greenhouses and the Levers, are more API driven. So they're like, hey, we're going to be this core thing. We're going to allow other people to like tie into us and handle these various use cases. On the HRIS side, Sapling is a good example of that as well. But it's like pretty early, right? So if you think about all the folks that hang off of a CDP or hang off of CRM, that's a lot. Whereas that's not quite there yet in HR tech and both on the HR side and also the recruiting side. But I think it's getting there.
One of the questions I was going to ask is, you wrote the Founding Sales book in 2015?
Yeah. So Geez, I mean, it hasn't shipped quite yet. I think this is the kind of a definitional like quibble. Like we don't actually have a hard copy of it yet, but it's been online as like a Google Doc that gets shared around since 2014 as I was writing it in progress. And now it has its own website at foundingsales.com since like, end of 2019. But yeah, like along that arc.
Yeah. And I am curious if you wrote that book today, what would be different? Another version of that question is, were you excited in sales tech? Have there been things that have, changed the field in some way or have the potential to do so?
I think that the additional sales tech, whether it's sales engagement software, conversational intelligence, or, CPQ software or whatever, really what this it's like optimization, at the frontier of selling. And really the biggest challenge, at least for startups and founders, is not around technology adoption. It's around just like very basic things like, am I comfortable talking to people I don't know? Yeah. Right? Like those are the major failure modes when you talk to founders. The major failure modes are not technology driven. The major failure modes are more just acumen and understanding driven. All those technologies are super fantastic and driving, my software company is a great example of this. Is like, advanced analytics that does kind of sales analysis of your reps for you. This drives performance of larger sales organizations, but at least as far as startups are concerned, most of it just kind of comes down to the like early blocking and tackling.
Totally. And so one of the principles I took from founding sales is this idea of when you're starting a company and it's just you need to make sure that you do all the sales yourself, that you know how to do it well. And then a mistake that some people make is they try to, once they do that, they maybe scale too quickly or hire too many reps too quickly. And the idea that you need to hire maybe one, maybe two, people to do it for you. You need to train them. And once they can do it super well or as well as you, that's when you scale. What would you edit to that characterization of?
Yeah, I think that was a very good Cliff's Notes there for sure. You should still go to foundingsales.com and read the book.
And the segue is let's talk about some other principles from the book, other takeaways that founders should.
No, but I think you nailed it. And I think really the biggest nut there is that early on it is the responsibility of the founder to prove at least the beginnings of the initial sales motion. And the reason why that's really important is because it's a natural extension of the writings that Erik and Steve Blank have done around customer development flows into early sales. So what you're doing when you're doing your customer interviews, when you're doing your customer development, you're learning about the market. You have this subject matter expertise in the market and how your offering solves the pains associated therewith that nobody really else has. And so if you're doing that and then you're trying to toss it over the wall to some poor account executive with a great plaid shirt like the one that I'm wearing right now, you're really missing out on both feedback loops that will inform your product. But also, you're playing this kind of grandiose game of telephone where you know all these things, and then you're trying to communicate that to somebody who's then going to communicate it to the prospect. And it's just not efficient. It leads to lots of problems. And this is why Steve Blank, I think in his book, he says, startups don't get to scale until they fired at least one, maybe two VPs of sales. And I think the response to that is, well, how about if we just don't fire those VP of sales and instead, concretize the sales motion, the initial sales motion ourselves, prove that somebody else other than the founder can do it. And then at that point, now we're ready to export that to other salespeople.
One of the things I was spending some time with a startup and they had this sort of interesting technology, but they were curious on who should be their first customer. Should it be startups? What kind of startups? Should it be SMBs? What kind of SMBs? Should it be more enterprise? How do you sort of navigate, maybe in the beginning, how do you even pick your customer?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that question would be, or what I would say to that startup is, who did you talk to? And so I think that this is one of the things that we run into as an industry full of people who get really excited about technologies. Don't get me wrong. I get excited about like cool new shit. But the important thing is like, we don't want to have a bunch of hammers running around looking for nails. Instead, what we want to understand is like, hey, what is your problem right here? Oh, I need, to hang this picture. Oh, okay. Well, maybe the right solution for that is not a hammer with a nail, but instead a, command strip or whatever the hell, that would be. So I think that my feedback to them would be, okay, how does this technology, what is the business pain that this technology resolves? And for whom is that business pain the greatest? So like Paul Graham had this tweet yesterday, and I thought it was good, where he said, hey, if your startup is responsible, if your startup relies on large companies, in order to making a decision in order to access users, be careful about that, because large companies will, or he said, the default will be that you will run out of money while waiting for the large company to make a decision. And he's actually not wrong, because like large companies don't like to make decisions, and there's lots of stakeholders and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing though is that large companies oftentimes have really big problems that only large companies have that are extraordinarily valuable. Yeah. And so sometimes, like if you're solving a problem that only really large companies have, that's okay. Just be aware of that and be capitalized for that. In general, I prefer a SMB based or mid-market direct sale go to market. But a good example of this would be like Blend, right? Blend, the like loan automation and kind of like underwriting automation software company. For the most part, they target really high end banks and like loan processors. Because it turns out that like the loan processing industry in the United States and the credit processing industry in the United States is, it's really clustered in like a few dozen providers. So if you want to attack that space, like you got to get good at enterprise sales. So I think my question to the startup in question would be like, cool, who has the pain that this technology resolves? Who has the most pain, and who's easiest to get in front of?
Yeah. And talk about the difference between selling to those different types of constituents or the different types of customers, and how founders or teams need to train themselves accordingly.
Oh, to like large enterprise versus mid-market? Yeah. Well, so the term that is useful here is what's known as a sales motion, which my joke is that this is something that we salespeople use as a term to describe the sales process, just as a way to kind of make it sound like sexier and more arcane or what have you. But it's actually, it's a good term of art. And so really every company and every product that is attacking a space has a sales motion, which essentially is just like a set of actions that are taken, a set of stakeholders that are engaged, that eventually drive towards a transaction, ideally 10 to 30% of the time. And so in the case of an enterprise sale, that sales motion is going to be long and slow, and it's going to involve lots of stakeholders, and it's going to involve politics, and it's going to involve considerations as to, am I going to get fired if I buy this thing, and who's got budgetary authority? And it's probably not going to have a lot of consideration for the end user. That's how those sales motions work. One of my favorite case studies of kind of like these three different tiers of go to market is, three survey companies. So Medallia, Qualtrics, and SurveyMonkey. So Medallia started out, they all really focus on survey software, and one of the biggest cases there is collecting user feedback. And Medallia started out in very high-end ASP, or high average selling price enterprise sale. Qualtrics was focused on more of an SMB mid-market sales motion with a very small average selling price to start. And then SurveyMonkey was consumer prosumer. They were kind of an example of like very easy in, kind of pre-Dropbox, if you will. So the mid-market direct sale is more you're interacting with a single person, you're interacting with maybe a couple people, and it's a more compressed sales cycle. And then of course there's the prosumer SMB one where you're interacting with just like one person, and it's almost just kind of like a consumer sale where, hey, does this solve your problem? Okay, cool. You want to buy?
Right. Yeah. Talk, bottoms up is hot right now. We were talking about Notion, we have Figma, Airtable, a bunch of these types of companies. How should founders be thinking about sales and building sales orgs, or just go to market broadly in the context of bottoms up?
Yeah. So bottoms up is super powerful. It's probably, it's one of the biggest things that's impacting business software right now. And mainly what's happening there is that the same dynamics that applied to open source and developer tools previously is now coming to business software. So, God bless the software engineers out there, but there's only so many of them, right? So it turns out there's a lot of other people who have like business problems and need to use software as well. And so really what the crux of it is that the person who has the problem can identify that they have a problem. They can research the solution to that problem, and the phrase that I like to use for this is they can permissionlessly start using it. Yeah. And so that was something that was really just like developer centric historically, but now that's applying everywhere. So somebody would be like, hey, I really need to design a poster, and I can Google how to design a poster. And lo and behold, I see a landing page for Canva. And I can click through to that, and like lo and behold, I land on a template for a poster, and all of a sudden I'm like designing a poster with Canva, and like what happened? And just as a product marketer or as a marketer, even if I'm at a big ass company that has design resources internally, I'm using Canva, yeah. Right? So that's extraordinarily powerful. And so I think that the crux here is that these business tools, whether it's Figma or Zoom or Slack or what have you, can really learn a lot from those early developer tools and open source companies. So a woman who led sales at a company called Xamarin, Stephanie Schatz, I think Stephanie Schatz Friedman now, she really kind of hit me to this when I was doing a customer interview with her at Xamarin, where the move is less around like, hey, do you want a demo? Do you want a demo? Do you want a demo? When somebody downloads the software, it's more like helping somebody on their way to getting to utility. And so I think one of the biggest problems associated with this is that you get folks who look at this from the standpoint of, oh, the product allows for install and use by itself. That will probably be the entirety of my business model. And so this is like the like Twilio / Stripe, hey, we just publish documentation and people just buy it, right? They just like buy it on their own, or the Stuart Butterfield, like, oh yeah, we're Slack. We don't have salespeople. At the time that he said that, they actually had a ton of salespeople. And I think that's actually a really, problematic way of thinking about it. Really what you want is your product-led growth is marketing. It drives inbound. Your product gets people to initial utility, but in order to drive usage throughout the organization or get to larger transactions, you really have to have a sales organization. The most successful organizations, examples of that have been Zoom, Slack, like the second gen of this, insofar as like, Dropbox was great. It's obviously a very impressive company. They didn't heavily invest in an enterprise sales or direct sales organization at quite the same scale as, say, like a Box. Yeah. And so I think that like the Zooms and the Slacks and the second gen of those folks have like learned from those lessons. And so they should all like send a fruit basket to Dropbox, or like, yes, where some of these organizations that maybe had really cool inbound lead gen funnels, but didn't maybe capitalize on them the way that probably should have, because we've all learned from it. Yeah.
Talk about pipe hitting and what's so important or interesting about that.
I don't know about how like interesting it is necessarily, but there are some organizations, or there are some businesses where, there are some business pains where the only way you're going to be able to get in front of the buyer is a direct sale, like getting, outbound, knocking down the door, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that with the rise of product led, that's maybe, degrading a little bit there, but I still think that it is an important skill if that is something that your organization, if that is a business pain that or if that is a market that your organization is going after. So an example of this would be, MemSQL, right? They make amazing in-memory database software that they sell to like large organizations that run their own data centers. So it turns out it very much requires an outbound, sale where you're getting in front of these very high end, IT professionals. And the good news is that when they make a transaction, it's like a $500,000 transaction. So I think it's one of those things where, it's maybe not the most glamorous or sexy thing in the world, but if that is the thing, so a good example of this would be like, Blend or Workday back in the day. So like if that's the market that you're attacking, it's just something you got to do.
Totally. And let's talk about building a sales org a little bit. Like once the founders got it, once they've trained a couple people to do it well, what are the mistakes you see founders typically make? Maybe it's related to onboarding, maybe it's related to something else that they make as they try to scale.
Yeah. So once you have a couple sales reps who are successfully repeatedly selling your solution, that's kind of the point at which, if you're not adding more salespeople, you're really kind of eating opportunity costs at that point. So I think there's kind of two major failure modes there. One would be not scaling. And in that regard, kind of like, continuing to sell yourself. The other one would be, scaling up too rapidly. And I think there are some pretty good examples of this. Zenefits is obviously the best example of this, where, scaling wildly before you know exactly what the unit economics are. In the case of Zenefits, the biggest problem, of course, was the unit economics of ongoing customer delivery. But there are some organizations where the unit economics of customer acquisition, even if their margins are good, are problematic, where you add a bunch of salespeople who, they sell enough, but they don't sell. Generally speaking, you want to see a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 ratio of revenue that is being acquired to sales rep compensation associated with that revenue. So the cost of sale. So scaling up a bunch of salespeople who, are selling twice or 3 times as much as their salary is another kind of failure mode there. So I think that those are some initial things to look out for. I think the other kind of major failure mode there would be hiring the wrong first sales leader. And so the two kind of major failure modes that I see there are, one, hiring a sales leader to figure out the sales motion for you, which we kind of addressed already. Like it's on you to figure out that initial sales motion and maybe, and close 10, 20, 30 customers on your own. The second problem there is really just hiring somebody who's just very off pattern. And so normally in an early stage organization, what you're looking for is somebody who has recently been directly managing reps, or is maybe a manager of managers. So managing a sales manager who's managing, say like 6 reps, and managing another SDR manager who's managing 4 SDRs 8 SDRs or what have you. The big failure there is like, hey, I'm going to hire a CRO at a big co. Yeah. Where really the stage that you're at is you need somebody who's going to take your 2 reps and take it to 8, and be very tactical and used to making slides, writing email templates, being on calls versus being in meetings. Yeah. So those are kind of the big, and you see this all the time where, it's super easy to see. We're like, oh my God, that person who was at a public company is going to join that Series A or Series B company. And like, you just know that it's going to be a disaster. And so I won't, name examples here, but it's just a very repeatable kind of failure mode. And
so what are the right frameworks for, I guess, a couple things. One is when to hire a CRO, or the sort of different levels within sales. And then 2, what are we looking for in sales reps versus VP of sales versus CRO versus other sort of frameworks?
So I think it really kind of is contingent on what stage you're at. So if you're at the point Well, here, let's back it up. If you're at the point where you are selling yourself and you're now want to say, okay, I'm selling this repeatedly myself. Now I need a couple other reps to sell this as well. What you're looking for there is, early stage sellers who ideally are at a company that is, like 3 years ahead of you. So the example that I like to use here is if you were asking about recruiting tech earlier. If you're in the recruiting tech space, so say you're like a company like Top Funnel, right? They do really interesting automated recruiting and sourcing messaging. Well, so like hiring successful reps out of a lever or a greenhouse or what have you is probably going to be your right approach there. Hiring somebody who sells Yelp or Yext or some SMB centric media product to come and sell $25,000 marketing automation software, it's going to be a misfit because those Yelp sellers are great at what they do, but what they spend their time doing is having lots of conversations with small business owners. And kind of conversely, in the case where if you're hiring somebody who has a slower sales motion to work on a faster sales motion, so that's not going to be a fit. So look for sales motion fit, look for stage fit. And then if you can have subject matter expertise overlap, so for instance, if you're hiring for a recruiting tech software company, yes, go for like a lever or a greenhouse or what have you. If you're in marketing automation, I think you probably see this with a great company, a modern ESP software provider is Iterable. If you look at if you look at their sales reps, it's a lot of like Marketo people, a lot of responses people, what have you. So what you don't want to do is like then jump all the way up to the dinosaur. Say, hey, I have a new recruiting software that I'm selling. I'm going to go hire somebody from Oracle Taleo. It's probably like the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And when is the right time for CROs? Sorry, did you just say that?
No.
Okay.
Oh, the right time for
a CRO?
Well, I mean, titles are funny things, right? And so really the way to think about it is, what is the job to be done? And so if you're early and you have 2 successful sales reps that are repeatedly selling, well, the person that you're hiring is probably a sales manager at Lever or at Greenhouse or at MuleSoft or at Snowflake right now. You can call them your CRO. That doesn't really mean anything. Yeah. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be managing 3 reps to go to 8 reps and hire a bunch of SDRs. You can call them your VP of sales. You can call them their head of sales. But I think the important thing here is to focus on the thing that needs to be done. Now, if you're later stage, right? So the traditional the actual definition of something like a CRO is an executive who is responsible for marketing, sales, and customer success, so all revenue. So if that's what that person is going to be responsible for, great, go crazy. Just be very clear on what you're hiring for, and be clear to them as to what it is that they're going to be doing.
Yeah. On that note, let's segue a little bit into companies that scale sales organizations well versus ones that don't. What separates the two, or how should we think about scaling in the context of a sales org?
So I think that organizations that have scaled their sales organizations very well are the ones who, to use a phrase that's becoming more popular, nail it before they scale it. And so just making sure that you have the beginnings of a repeatable sales motion. So one, it's fine to have account executives that can repeatedly close customers, but do you know that you can repeatedly fill their calendars, for instance? And then moreover, once customers are closed, are you confident? Do you know that when they go off to CS, that they get to success, they're high NPS, they're high, they renew and they expand, etc. So validating the organizations that scale the most successfully are those who kind of take kind of like pause points and say, hey, cool, I know that I can repeatedly sell this myself. Wait a minute, are customers getting to success? Oh no, I'm throwing a bunch of customers over to the wall to customer success, and they're not actually getting to utility, and they're not expanding, and they're low NPS. Uh-oh, we probably shouldn't throw more customers over the wall to customer success. Or similarly, hey, cool, let's add another, we have an account executive who is having success right now, or 2 account executives that are having success. Let's add 2 more. Oh, wait a minute. We don't have enough opportunities to feed them. And the initial sources of leads have not been able to scale in order to keep them fully utilized. Uh-oh, probably shouldn't add more account executives. We probably should figure out how to ramp those sources of leads. So it's really one of the books that I love to recommend to folks to read is a book called The Goal. It's a manufacturing research book written as a novel. But really sales organizations are just factories. There's revenue acquisition factories. And so you've got essentially an assembly line, and you just got to make sure that all parts of the assembly line are operating effectively, because if one part of the assembly line is like messed up, then you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. And what is the best way to think about the relationship between sales and customer success? I mean, who's responsible for a renewal, or how do we make sure that these orgs both, work well together? Yeah.
So I think the best way to think about them is just really kind of the part of the same org. And then this like historical concept of them being different, like segmented, is really something that's kind of disappearing over time. A gentleman named Jocko van der Koelie runs a company called Winning by Designs. They're a go-to-market consulting agency. And so he has some pretty good writings on this around, he calls it like not the funnel, but the bow tie, where what you're doing is you're bringing people down a funnel into a transaction. And then the other side of the expanding bow tie is they get to value, and then they start expanding their usage. So generally what you want is a lot of symbiosis between sales and customer success. So to your question about, okay, well then what is the division of responsibilities between upsell and expansion and renewal and what have you? Well, first off, a hallmark of a modern sales organization is specialization and kind of like division of labor. And so the reason why we've been able to do that a la an assembly line is because of like modern CRMs, where we can say, oh, okay, cool. An SDR creates an opportunity. They hand it off to the account executive. The account executive works on it. They closes the deal, hands it off to customer success. So taking advantage of specialization and division of labor is actually very powerful. The thing is, you just have to make sure that it's very clear who owns what and where the handoffs are. And so in terms of what are the best ways of splitting up responsibilities between AEs and CS, generally speaking, what I find is that account executives owning the initial transaction, obviously, and then at least for the first some amount of time, maybe it's a quarter, maybe it's a year, being responsible for upsells, because usually what the account executive understands is where the other opportunities for commercial transaction are in the organization, but that the customer success is responsible for success and also renewals, mainly because what you want is you want your account executives continuing to hunt and go after new business. So that's like usually a design pattern that I see. That being said, if you have a larger, slower sales motion where the upsell isn't going to happen until year 2 or year 3, then sometimes keeping that relationship with the account executive makes sense. You just have to make sure that their quota expands over time to take into consideration that they have all these existing customers like in their backpack, if you will. So they just can't eat out on their previous customers.
Totally. How about how sales interfaces with sort of the rest of go-to-market? Perhaps let's focus on product market a little bit. Maybe you can talk a bit about product marketing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about pricing and how founders should be thinking about what are the right frameworks to think about pricing?
Yeah, I mean, wow, pricing's a tough one. Early on, I think pricing is one of your best levers to drive transactions and to drive customer acquisition in an agile way without requiring engineering resources. So you can so for instance, you might actually have somebody who's like, yeah, you know what? I don't have as much need as your offering can resolve for me. I don't have that much pain. And of course, the response to that might be, oh, okay, well, let's just charge you for exactly how much like pain is resolved. And do you actually need to turn off incremental features or what have you in order to support that? No, you can just charge them less, right? They may not know the difference. So I think that early pricing, usually it's best to start low, index it off of, this is why having a set of beta customers where you have instrumented the value that is being consumed and gained is very helpful, because then what you can do is turn around to future prospects and say, look, I know that you have this many account executives or let's pretend we're SalesLoft. I know that you have this many SDRs and that like this is going to allow them to do this much more activity and it's going to drive this many more meetings that are being created. And I know that the value of that is this based on the 50 existing customers I have, and I should be able to charge you for that. So starting with an ROI driven pricing model that doesn't diverge substantially from how your buyer thinks about purchasing. One of the things I like to say is that only one or two innovations at a time. So if your customer is used to buying based on seats, or if they're used to buying based on like API calls or what have you, try to align with how they think about this. Just because the thing that you're trying to prove is that they're going to, consume your product and get utility out of it, as opposed to like consume your product, get utility out of it, and by the way, wrap their mind around this entirely new pricing model. So once you've got that going, then it's kind of like what you want to do is push the boundaries of pricing and see if you can, just keep raising your prices until you get to the point where people are consistently saying no. And at that point, back off.
Yeah. How about messaging? What's the right framework to think about?
Yeah. So really where your messaging should come from in your initial customer development, when you're figuring out how people address the problem that you're solving, how people address the problem that you're seeking to solve, usually what will end up happening is like people will tell you the various pains that they're having and the sub pains associated therewith. And so based on those interviews and those conversations, that's where you will choose to deploy your engineering resources to build features that then solve those pain points. And so then really each of those features that then tie to those pain points then kind of become their own messaging bucket. So it really, like, good messaging starts out at basics, just explaining the thing that you built in the context of the problem that you discovered initially. And so, getting highfalutin or on that ends up being usually where people get wrapped around the axle is like they're building a platform, blah, 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 blah. As opposed to like, look, you got this problem right here. Like, we have this thing that solves the shit out of it and does it wildly better than the way that you do it right now. Oh, you have this sub problem right here. That's cool. Our offering attacks that sub problem in this way that solves it in this way that is, 5x better than how you're currently solving it or the opportunity cost that you're eating right now.
Yeah. Going back to building a sales org for a second, what is the right way of sort of managing it, making sure that people are set up for success or even doing well? They're like, what metrics are important to think about for measuring sales effectiveness, efficiency, et cetera, or frameworks?
The things that are, so the first thing to do when measuring the effectiveness of a sales organization is to recognize that it can be measured. Yeah. Which is oftentimes like a big, a big step up for a lot of folks. And then really what you're just doing is breaking down your sales motion and the associated actions into things that can be measured. Kind of the thing we were saying before about a sales organization is really just a revenue acquisition factory. So some basic things there might be like new opportunities that folks are engaging, like how many new deals are they having? Are they engaging per time period? If you're a higher velocity organization, that might be per week or per month. If you're a slower sales velocity organization, it might be per quarter. So new things coming in, the activity associated with working those things, and then outflow as well. So new opportunities, new, first customer meetings, total customer meetings, and even just like raw activity. How many emails are people sending? How many calls are being done? And then how much pipeline, how many opportunities they have ongoing, how much pipeline, how many opportunities are advancing, and then efficiency metrics like what is their win rate? What is the average sale price? And then those are like the basics. So I think that the important thing is just start, right? Like, and you don't have to stand up an ornate analytics harness necessarily. You just start with a whiteboard if you're at super basics. But the important thing is to decompose what the actions are that are being done, and then start keeping track of them.
Yeah. And what's the right framework for thinking about setting up comp sort of system across a sales org? Yeah.
So generally speaking, a standard sales compensation or SaaS compensation plan will be a 50-50 split between base compensation and variable compensation. And then, so then the question, of course, is oftentimes what you can pay is contingent on the efficiency of your sales motion. And so there's like a little bit of a circularity there, where if it turns out that it takes 5 customer facing meetings in order to sell your solution, and the average sale price is $20,000, and there's really only room for 15 customer facing meetings a week, well, maybe one of your sales reps can sell for like $50,000 of software a month. Okay, if that's the case, then they're going to be selling about $600,000 of software a year, and so a 10% commission on that would be around 60 grand, which if it's 50 split might be $120,000. So in order to get to $120,000 might sound like, hey, okay, that sounds really great if I live in Salt Lake City. Yeah. It might not sound all that great for a sales professional if they live in San Francisco or New York or what have you. So then the question might be like, okay, well, who can you get for that amount of money? And where? So I think the important thing, like compensation, at least economically sustainable compensation for your company, kind of descends from how revenue intense your product can be in the existing market. And so in general, what you're going to be seeing is sales reps expecting a 50-50 split with 10% commission. And so if you're in a market where in order for somebody to sustain themselves and pay for their housing and pay for their food and save, like a mid-market sales rep has to cost $160,000, that might not be economically viable. So this is why you see lower ASP software, lower ASP providers like Yelp moving their sales organizations to Phoenix or Denver or Chicago or what have you. Even higher ASP companies. So like a company like Iterable has account executives here in San Francisco, but they also have a sales organization in Denver as well.
Yeah. As we're building out this organization, how do we make sure that we do referral based hiring well? Like what separates the orgs from who do it well from those who don't?
The organizations that do referral recruiting well do it super intentionally, right? Where they sit people down, they go through their networks, the same way that organizations that do referral prospecting do the same sort of thing. Like there are software that are very helpful. Like there's a company called Teamable that allows organizations to gang together all their networks and recruit out of them. But it really requires somebody to say like, hey, what we're going to do? We're going to be very proactive in sitting down with Erik and saying, hey, wonderful, Erik, you've been at the organization about a month. I'm sure you're really stoked right now. You're in your honeymoon period. Let's identify a bunch of people out of your LinkedIn network or your Facebook network that would be great SDR candidates or great AE candidates. And let's fill a spreadsheet with them. And then I'm going to reach out to them.
Yeah, totally. And so we're hiring the people. How do we set them up for success in terms of creating an onboarding process that gets the most out of them? What do the great orgs who do that well do?
the orgs that do a good job of onboarding, so first are intentional about it and delineate a curriculum for it. So, hey, this is what week 1 is going to look like. This is what week 2 is going to look like. This is what week 3 is going to look like. This is what week 4 is going to look like.
Might employ Rap2Fem for some freestyle rap training.
Right, exactly. Obviously, that'd be very important in week 1 and 2. So having a curriculum, being thoughtful about it, having materials associated therewith, actually compelling that the new hires do it, that you're authenticating that they're doing it, that you have exit criteria associated with them being pitch certified or them being demo certified or what have you. So a lot of organizations, the failures that organizations will have is they'll say, hey, I want you to get to success. And then you say, okay, well, what does success look like? Well, it looks like a demo that looks like this. It looks like a slide presentation that looks like this. It looks like objection handling that looks like this. Oh, okay, cool. Do you have that demo scripted out? Oh, you don't? Okay, well, then how the hell is a new rep going to learn the demo if you haven't bulleted it out in a Google Doc, right? You actually don't have a slide deck? Oh, okay. So I think the first thing is systematizing what does work and collateralizing it. Then the next thing is that actually compelling people to do it. It's just like a playbook. I mean, you're a Michigan guy, right? Yeah. So like, the Jim Harbaugh or, I'm actually from Jersey, too. So like, any football team is going to have their playbook. It's not like in the air. It's written down. Yeah. It's laminated. And so having that systematized and then drilling people on the execution thereof is the thing that differentiates organizations that have new folks that get to success quickly versus folks that flounder and maybe don't have success.
Yeah. Is there anything you think we didn't cover or that you're like, oh, it'd be cool to leave the founder, but any topic that we didn't get to?
No, I think that there's lots of really great resources out there for people to learn about go to market. And so for different stages. So if you're just starting out, a really great resource is my book. It's at foundingsales.com. The whole text of the book is there. You don't have to buy it. It's just available. It's like open sourced. That's really the basics. Other resources for just, getting rad at sales would be, there's a book called Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan. It's really fantastic. There's another book there's a couple books on sales development excellence. One is the Sales Development Playbook. It's written by Trish Bertuzzi. Another one is called Leading Sales Development. It's by Jeremy Donovan and Elia Homason. Those are all really fantastic resources for people who are trying to figure out, after you've figured out your initial sales motion, which is what Founding Sales is all about. These are ones that are for systematizing your go-to-market and managing your sales organization. Yeah.
For people who want to go deeper, where else can you point them in terms of just finding more about you and Atrium and following you?
Yeah. So, if you want to learn more, go to foundingsales.com. That's where my book on startup sales lives. If you run a sales organization of greater than 10 SDRs plus AEs, go to atriumhq.com. We make amazing sales performance analysis software that does the analysis for you. And if you're a sales leader, a sales operations person, we run the nation's largest sales operations and leadership community for high growth startups. It's called Modern Sales, and you can find that at modernsaleshq.com.
Awesome. My guest today has been Pete Kazanjy. Pete, thank you for dropping some knowledge today with our audience.
My pleasure. You really put me through the paces, dude.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.